Well, hello, Science Pub. How is everyone? Welcome once again to Science Pub Corvallis here at the Old World Deli. We're so appreciative that so many people have showed up here for our debut presentation for 2010. And it's going to be a good one tonight, and we're really glad that so many of you are here to share in this. As you know, Science Pub is put together each month by Oregon State University, the Downtown Corvallis Association, and the Oregon Museum of Science and Industry, because we all believe so strongly in making science available in these fun, friendly presentations to members of the public, so you can interact with the great experts that we get to see on campus and at OMSI every day. So thank you once again for being here. We got a wonderful presentation tonight. I just want to remind everybody that next month's Science Pub presentation, just in time for American Heart Month, is going to be a presentation from Kim Montaigne of Samaritan Health Services Heart and Vascular Institute. She's going to be here to talk about heart health fact and fiction and some exciting new advances in cardiac care technology. So if you care about your heart, and I think all of us do, please show up next month, February 8th, for a wonderful presentation. The month after that, March 8th, we're going to be doing CSI Corvallis, all about forensics. So make sure you're here for that as well. People are pointing to the TV screen, and I don't know what that means, but great. So turn it up, I think is what Jay said. Turn it off. Turn it down. I'm getting like air traffic controller signs. Okay. So my shoes are fine. All right. So let's do our trivia. Does everybody know how the trivia works? You should all have a trivia answer sheet, maybe a small pencil close to the ear. So we're going to ask a few trivia questions, and those of you who get the fewest wrong or the most right, depending on whether you're optimist or pessimist, will win a prize, right? So it's time for trivia. Don't cheat, and after you're done with answering the questions, we'll go through the answers. You'll pass your papers to a neighbor, and we'll see who did the best. So here are our 10 trivia questions. Number one, how much of our brain do we actually use? Is it 5%, 10%, 30%, 60%, or nearly all of it? All right? How much of your brain, what proportion do you actually use? Which of these is right? Mark your answer now. All right, question number 2. What part of the brain is the core of emotional processing? Is it the hippocampus, the prefrontal cortex, the number C, or the cerebellum? Anybody want to venture a pronunciation on the amygdala? The amygdala. Okay. Clearly, this was not my area of study in school. What part of the brain is the core of emotional processing? The hippocampus, the prefrontal cortex, the amygdala. Got it right that time. Or the cerebellum. Question number 3. Everyone keeping up? What neurochemical is responsible for the warm fuzzies we feel during lovey-dovey emotions? Serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine, or oxytocin? Serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine, or oxytocin? Number 4, cortisol, an important human stress hormone, is synthesized in the liver, the pituitary, the adrenals, or the stomach. Where's cortisol synthesized? The liver, the pituitary, the adrenals, or the stomach? Number 5. Mia says she is a, quote, right brain person because she is really creative and artistic. Mia is A, well-versed on how brain function is organized, B, making a pop science oversimplification, C, suppressing her potential love of math and science, or D, naturally deficit in analytic thought because she uses her bright brain so much. She's a right brain person because she's really creative and artistic, but really she's A, B, C, or D. Okay, on to number 6. Which statement best describes the relationship between one's accuracy in judging another person's personality or emotional state and the confidence they have in their judgment? A, the more certain one is that their judgment is correct, the more accurate they are. B, judgments are more accurate when people are highly confident, but are not necessarily inaccurate when confidence is low. C, judgments that we are sure about are no more accurate than judgments that feel like we are guessing. Or D, the more certain we are of our judgment about another, the less accurate we are. Which of those super complicated answers is correct? All right, number 7. Being so empathetic that you can perceive the internal thoughts and emotions of others, A, is a characteristic of intellectually intelligent individuals. B, is associated with higher marital satisfaction. C, enables adolescents to better cope with the psychological stresses associated with coming of age. Or D, none of the above is true. Any ideas? All right, on to number 8. The human face has a complicated, nuanced musculature that can produce an extremely large number of facial expressions. How many facial expressions are seen by us as smiles? Is it 18, 8, 5, or 3? This is the number of facial expressions that are seen by us as smiles. 18, 8, 5, or 3. Okay, number 9. How many facial expressions spontaneously occur when a person experiences an intense feeling of joy? 10, 5, 2, or 1? The number of facial expressions that spontaneously occur when a person experiences an intense feeling of joy: 10, 5, 2, or 1. All right, and on to our final question. Number 10, the channel of communication that best reveals a person's true internal emotional, and attitudinal state is A, facial expressions, B, just their eyes, C, body language from the neck down. What? D, their tone of voice, ignoring what is said, and E, what is said, i.e. words. So the channel of communication that best reveals a person's true internal emotional and attitudinal state, facial expressions, just their eyes, body language from the neck down, their tone of voice, or what is said. All right. And this is the part where you pass your paper to your neighbor. We're not grading on the curve. Okay, and here they are in order. Number 1. How much of our brain do we use? It is. Answer is nearly all of it. Okay, number 2. The part of the brain that is the core of emotional processing is the amygdala. Thank God I learned how to say it. Did I say it right? That's right, okay. All right, number 3. The neurochemical responsible for the warm fuzzies we feel during lovey-dovey emotions is oxytocin. Number 4. Cortisol, which is an important human stress hormone, is synthesized in the adrenals. Number 5. Mia says she's a right-brain person because she's really creative and artistic, but in truth, Mia is making a pop science oversimplification. All right, Mia. Number 6, the statement that best describes the relationship between one's accuracy in judging another person's personality and the confidence they have in their judgment is B. Judgments are more accurate when people are highly confident, but are not necessarily inaccurate when confidence is low. All right, on to number 7. Being so empathetic that you can perceive the internal thoughts and emotions of others. None of the above are true. D, none of the above are true. All right, number 8. The human face is a complicated musculature. How many facial expressions are seen by us as smiles? The answer is 18. 18 smiles. All right, number 9. How many facial expressions spontaneously occur when a person experiences intense feelings of joy? The answer is 1. Wow. Anybody care to show theirs? No? All right, number 10. The channel of communication that best reveals a person's true internal emotion and attitudinal state is the tone of their voice. All right. Boy, tough trivia tonight. Okay, so how many people got all of them right? That many. How many people only missed one? Anybody get 9 of 10? How many people only missed 2? There's one back here. All right. Looks like our grand prize winner. How many people only missed 3? 1, 2, 3. All right. Please keep your hands up for those of you who missed only 3. Shelley, they are right here, here, and here. All right? Right there? Got it. Okay, thank you very much for playing. All right, folks, we've got a lot of people trying to get seats here. If you have a spare one, then please raise your hand. And those of you who would like to watch from the vestibule area in the hallway, we're also, Larry, we have monitors in the hall as well, so you can watch from there as well. We've got 2 really exciting, wonderful speakers tonight. It's my pleasure to introduce them. Dr. Frank Brunieri received his PhD in social psychology from Harvard in 1988. He was one of 2 psychologists given the Young Investigator Award by the National Science Foundation in 1992 for his research on the processes involved in face-to-face interactions, including nonverbal behavior, interpersonal coordination, empathy, and person perception accuracy. He formerly chaired OSU's psychology department from 2003 to 2008, and you've seen his work in places like the New York Times Science section, New Yorker Magazine, Dateline NBC, the Discovery Channel, New Yorker Magazine, and many more places. Dr. Sarina Rodrigues is an assistant professor of neuropsychology for OSU. She earned her PhD in neuroscience from New York University in 2003. Before that, she graduated from someplace in Eugene, Oregon, I don't know, whatever. So, she's done postdoctoral research at Columbia, Stanford, and most recently, Berkeley, before joining the OSU faculty last fall. And you may have read her work in the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, the Times of London, and many other publications and media outlets on empathy and stress and the neurotransmitter oxytocin, which she's going to be talking about tonight. So please give a warm welcome to both and to Dr. Rodrigues, who will be speaking first.
Closer to the mic. Closer to the mic.
Closer to the mic? Okay, how's that? All right. So today we're talking about getting inside your head. So let's talk about emotions. So emotions are a huge part of our life from the first day that we were born. They come in a huge variety of flavors, and they can be both really empowering to get you to move to action, and they can be absolutely debilitating, knock you on your feet so you can't do anything. Now, one of our most robust emotions and responses is the stress response. Why is this so strong? It's raw and primal, and it's amazingly robust. It's a universal survival mechanism, so it's in place in a huge medley of species. same brain circuitry exists for a variety of different animals. And further, it's the root of many emotions and emotional disorders. So the stress response enables skunks to spray their offensive odors. It enables us for our blood-curdling screams to get out of that situation. It causes the blowfish to puff up and look bigger than it actually is. Same thing for cats as well. It causes them to hiss and get big, so they look actually bigger than they actually are. And it can also enable the flight response. Now the stress response is put in place to get us out of peril in life and death situations. So when we need to duck for cover or to get out of danger, it's really active. Now this can occur in life or death situations. Some of this actually happens, some not really. But nonetheless, the stress response is really important to get us out of danger. But it's not always in life or death situations. We have peril in everyday situations. So it's important to have the stress response, to swerve out of traffic when we're busy looking at our phones, making phone calls or texting, or if someone cuts us off. It's also responsible for ducking and covering. If you hear a loud boom, it's really important to react instantaneously before you really know what's going on. It causes us to be a little skeptical when we're in shady situations. Thank you. And it can also enable us to drive a little bit more carefully so that we don't get a traffic ticket when we're driving along in traffic. Not to say that peril is not necessarily always bad stuff. Some of us like to tease our stress response and our fear response by going on roller coasters, jumping out of airplanes, watching scary movies, and so forth. So it can be a good or bad thing. Now, how many got this one right? The amygdala is the core of emotional circuitry in the brain. Good job. So, the amygdala is there on the left. In red, that's if I slice my brain down the middle this way. Thank you. Underestimated how short I am. And then the coronal section on the right, if I cut my brain this way, is that red structure right there. And it comes from the Greek word for almond. Now, how does the amygdala activate during an emotional response? So we get this information coming into our sensory organs, whether it be our eyes, or our ears, or our skin, and that's basically sent right away to the thalamus, and that's the sensory processing part of the brain. The thalamus has an emergency shortcut to the amygdala, where it can go to activate. It'll make our heart rate go through the roof, our blood pressure increase, it'll mobilize our muscles so we can either duck or get out of danger, and also recruit our blood-curdling screams and so forth. As this diagram depicts, we also have a slower route that goes to the cortex, and that provides more nuanced, sophisticated information to the amygdala. So while instantly you're going to freeze in your tracks if you see a snake, there's a little bit of a slow thing going on as well, trying to decide if that snake can actually get to you, is that a poisonous snake, or so forth. So that can go on to recruit the amygdala to initiate the stress response, or actually tell you to chill out and that you're actually not in danger. Now, emotional information is also provided with context from the hippocampus. So the hippocampus is a really key part of the brain. It's basically a word for seahorse, and it's that blinky structure right there. And you can see how close it is to the amygdala. And that provides information about the environment to emotional memories. Who, what, when, where, why all these things different happen. And it helps provide an index for these emotional information and events so that later on we can access them more readily. The amygdala always gets a lot of information from the prefrontal cortex, and that provides really strong inhibitory hold over your emotional responses. It allows these high-order cognitive processes such as emotion regulation, cognition, imagination, news of an abstract state, and so forth, to influence how we respond emotionally to certain events. So the amygdala is one of the most quiet parts of the brain, unless you have a stress disorder and that sort of thing. So it's really important to keep it quiet. But as we all know, this ability, the prefrontal cortex, is what essentially distinguishes us from other species. Because we have this ability to have really analytical and logical thinking, but it's a double-edged sword. Our ability to have such a big prefrontal cortex also causes us to be really obsessive. The Prefrontal cortex is the part of your brain that keeps you up at night from thinking too much and so forth. And this is just a diagram to show the functional connectivity of it all. So the prefrontal cortex sends information to the amygdala, the hippocampus, and there's a lot of crosstalk going on as well, so they communicate with each other, so they can have these really, help you basically develop these key emotional responses. And here's basically this complex diagram, but I'll break it down for you. This is what happens during the stress response. So the amygdala is activated, and it sends information to the adrenal glands of your body. So they basically sit right on top of your kidneys. And when the stress response is executed, essentially, the adrenal gland synthesizes and releases both epinephrine and norepinephrine, and also glucocorticoids, such as cortisol for humans. And the release of these stress hormones causes a whole medley of things to happen in your body. It causes your heart rate to start jumping. It makes your blood pressure increase. It'll mobilize your energy to your muscles so you can get out of that situation and run or duck for cover. It enhances your immunity very transiently. And it slows down things that you don't need to get out of danger. So if you're being chased by a lion, you don't have to worry about growing or reproducing at that moment. You need to get out of there. And so basically, your body and brain knows it's time to shut down those things that take a lot of metabolism and energy just so you can get out of that emotional situation. And this is just to illustrate that there's a feedback loop. So all of these stress hormones have a way of getting back into your brain. So when you have all these glucocorticoids or cortisol running through your system, and also epinephrine and norepinephrine, that goes back to make your brain respond to these emotional events as well. And it can enhance things both in the short and long term. So a little stress can be a good thing. A little stress will get us out of bed in the morning, so I know a lot of us would love to stay in bed all day, but we know we have to get up in order to do our duties, get to work on time, study so we don't fail those exams, and to also enhance our activity during competition and sports. So a little stress can be a really healthy thing to motivate us and to get us to do the things that we need to do in order to survive and to provide for ourselves. But as we all know, too much stress can be a very, very, very bad thing. I think we all know intuitively that too much stress can do all kinds of terrible things to your body. So a little too much stress can lead to heart disease, diabetes, cause your skin to break out, you name it. The stress response in excess can basically shut you down and cause all kinds of horrible things to happen to your body and your brain. And this is just an illustration. So on the left column, we have brain cells from a control animal, and then on the right from a stress animal. And you can see in the amygdala, a little stress actually causes the brain cells in your amygdala, the emotional core of your brain, to grow and to make all these new connections. That's why if you go through traumatic events, or you obsess a little bit too much about negative things, you have all these different complex associations. So it's much easier to activate your amygdala, your emotional responses, and have all these strange, bizarre, and complex associations with them. In contrast, you'll notice in the hippocampus and the prefrontal cortex, the parts that are kind of the more cognitive areas of your brain that are really important for learning and memory and storing and regulating your emotions, those cells actually wither away. And so it can have huge consequences to your emotional system, making it a little bit more robust and reactive, and it can shut down your more cognitive areas as well. And too much stress can actually cause brain cells to die. So definitely look out for yourself. So as we probably know, there are some good and bad ways to cope with stress intuitively. So a lot of us are kind of hardwired to start drinking too much or eating too much, turning to drugs, yelling at strangers, kids, your students, punching your neighbor, wallowing in self-pity, and suppressing negative emotions. So these are all really negative ways to deal with stress. You might think you're dealing with them in the long run, but you're actually not. You're kind of just funneling these negative responses. What are some good ways to deal with stress? Well, I know you probably heard this all from everyone, from your doctor to your neighbors, but it's true. Exercise, fresh air, getting enough sleep, get some perspective. Chances are you're having a meltdown about something that's not going to kill you. You will survive, you will get out of that. So definitely try to get some perspective when you're dealing with stressful situations. It's important to cleanse and nurture your mind and spirit in whatever way you find that useful, whether it be spirituality or meditation or yoga, going out in nature and that sort of thing. It's the great outdoors, and I think people in Corvallis are really, really good at having healthy ways of dealing with stress, unlike other parts of the country. It's also important to reappraise negative situations. Don't suppress them, don't push them down. It's really important to kind of cognitively remap it in your head. So if something is really getting you down or freaking you out, think about the benefits that can come with it, think about the good things that can come out of it, and again, reframe it in your mind so it's less negative to you. And most importantly, and the key to happiness is really to build and maintain your social network. We tend to come from an individualistic society. We're kind of out on our own, fending for ourselves, but we have to realize that we're all in this together. And when we have people that we can count on for support, emotionally and physically, that can have a huge impact on your happiness, and it actually is the key. So that's what brings us to oxytocin, the warm and fuzzy chemical in your body. So this is basically a biological mechanism for dampening the stress response. Oxytocin is produced in the hypothalamus, so that's a part of the brain at the bottom of your brain. It communicates a lot with the amygdala, and it communicates a lot with the pituitary gland to have you release a whole bunch of other different hormones after that. So it functions both in the brain and in the bloodstream. It functions as a neurotransmitter and a hormone, so it has targets all over the body and the brain. It targets the amygdala, as I mentioned. It also causes the hippocampus in the heart to calm down, and the parasympathetic branch of the nervous system. As some of you may know, that parasympathetic branch is more of the rest and digest. We have the sympathetic nervous system, which is kind of our fight or flight response. It causes us to activate in emergency situations. And the parasympathetic branch is really important for calming us down, bringing us back to baseline, lowering your heart rate, lowering your blood pressure, and so forth. Oxytocin also has really potent physiological anxiolytic effects as well. So oxytocin in and of itself can decrease how much stress hormone you're releasing. It can also inhibit how much your heart is freaking out to stress. And it's also been shown to basically lower how much your amygdala is responding during emotional events. And so when I study oxytocin in the system, I'm really interested in individual differences. How might inborn individual differences in the oxytocin system influence our emotional behaviors? A lot of us can go through the same exact stimulus or the same exact experiences. Some of us will totally crawl up in the fetal position and freak out. Others will think it was fine and be more resilient. So is there an underlying biological mechanism behind that? And to that I turn to genetic variations of the oxytocin system. And what I looked at is a functional polymorphism, which is just a fancy term for meaning many forms. And for a functional polymorphism, it simply means that there are clearly more than one type in a natural species. Subtle modifications can have a mild or profound effect on your biology. Polymorphisms are extremely common across species, not just humans. It dictates in the ant kingdom who becomes a worker, who becomes a soldier, and the king and queen. You can see the morphology of flowers. It can influence the appearance and the functionality, the colors. And so it has a huge influence throughout us. Polymorphisms also influence what blood type we are and so forth. I'm really interested in these variations in the genetic system that affect our brain chemistry, and as a result, our personality, our psychological traits and behaviors, and how we respond to life experiences. And it's really interesting. These genetic variations of the dopamine system can affect how much you respond to reward or you seek rewarding behaviors, how prone you are to addictions and so forth. Genetic variations of the serotonin system can influence your mood, how prone you are to develop stress and anxiety when you have some hard knocks in life. And the oxytocin system also affects your emotional behaviors as well, and I'll walk you through that. And it's really nice. I mean, a lot of people think it's not great to look at genetics, and I just want to point out that this is one part of the equation, one drop in the bucket of who we are as a person, but they do have a profound effect on our neurobiology. Sometimes one amino acid substitution in one part of your gene can have a fourfold effect on how much you make dopamine, or how much you break down a certain thing, how different parts of your brain activate, and so forth. And it's a great thing. It would be a really boring universe if we were all exactly the same. And the beauty, these are kind of like Mother Nature's pharmacological trip to kind of best with our neurochemical systems and make us different. And it's great. Some of us tend to be a little bit more touchy-feely than others. Some of us are a little bit more jumpy. Some of us are a little bit more reward reactive. Some of us need to jump out of a plane to get the same excitement someone feels from finding a quarter on the floor. And we're all very different. And it's a good thing that we're so different. So for oxytocin, I studied a genetic difference that has been associated previously with autism and the propensity to develop autism, and also parenting styles, how sensitive parents are towards their child. I was really interested in oxytocin's role in calming the stress response. As I mentioned, it calms how much your heart freaks out during emotional events and so forth. And so to study this, I used the startle paradigm, which has been classically used for decades and decades in psychological and neuroscience literature, where you basically have participants hear these white noise bursts, it's like, and to see how much they jump. And as you probably know, by dealing with your friends and family, some of us are really emotionally reactive, and some of us are barely phased, so it's really, really interesting. And so I basically looked at how much people's hearts reacted during this fear-potentiated startle task, and then compared it to baseline. And what I found was that for both males and females, there was a fundamental difference based on someone's genotype and how much their heart freaked out when they were being stressed by these loud noises. So it seems like oxytocin indeed plays a role in how much we respond to stress, and there might be a genetic basis for this. I also use the stress reactivity scale. You can't always go by heart rate. Sometimes people are on medication, sometimes people are suppressing their emotions and so forth. And so we developed the stress reactivity scale where we're looking for a negative emotion reactivity in stressful situations and emergencies and crises. And we really wanted to distinguish this from just negative emotional blah or negative stress. So we're very much looking and tapping into how much people respond when they're in a stressful event. And likewise, just like with the heart rate reactivity, we were finding that people with this GG genotype responded less to stress with their hearts and also reported that they were less stress reactive. As I mentioned, oxytocin has another role, which is affiliative behavior. So its role in reproductive functions is really well known. People have been studying oxytocin for decades, but mostly with this role in uterine contraction when a mother is giving birth, during milk letdown so a mother can breastfeed, and all of this bonding, nurturing thing between a mother and a child. But more recently, we're starting to find that it's really important for pair bond formation, how much we're devoted to our partners, and so forth. So it supports affiliative behavior in a wide variety of species. And it's so robust that you can just inject a species, like here we have an illustration of a female rodent that was injected with oxytocin. She's madly in love with her partner. But if you block oxytocin, she becomes completely disinterested. So she's unable to form this attachment or this bond because their oxytocin is not accessible. And so there might be a biological mechanism for why some of us are a little bit more prone to be monogamous and devoteful throughout life, and other ones are kind of a bit more wanderers and playboys and that sort of thing. It's interesting, in humans, if people snort oxytocin, if they give it to them intranasally, it instantly increases their generosity, how much they trust someone, how much they have eye contact with other people, and their ability to see what other people are feeling. So it's really, really strong. Back in the day, everyone thought oxytocin was just important for women, but because administration of oxytocin can cause different fluctuations depending on when a woman is in her cycle or also induced labor, all of these snorting studies were done in men, showing that it has a really, really robust effect on emotional responsivity and abilities in men. If you measure oxytocin in the laboratory, it's been shown to directly relate to how much a parent and child are bonding with each other, how much feelings of love and trust you're feeling towards your partner, and also your empathy and subsequent generosity towards complete strangers. How much are you willing to give and to trust them? So you guys are probably thinking, oxytocin, that's pretty good stuff. How do I get some? I'm not going to basically promote taking drugs. I can tell you how you can get it naturally. Number one, you can get it by having more social bonds with your romantic partners, with your family and friends. All of these things have been shown to boost oxytocin levels in your system. How much love and trust you're feeling towards your partner and other people can also boost oxytocin. And finally, this physical contact, especially skin-to-skin contact. So intimacy, hugs, spooning, massage, orgasms, all of these things have been shown to make oxytocin surge in your system. So I was really interested, since oxytocin plays a role in both dampening the stress response and promoting appellative behaviors, if the same genetic variation that we were able to show to influence how much your heart freaks out or how stress reactive you are, does that influence altruism or empathy? So one test we used was the reading the mind in the eyes task. And this was developed by Simon Baron-Cohen, who happens to be Sacha Baron Cohen, or Borat's cousin. And he's actually a really, really prominent researcher in the field of autism. So he has basically shown with this task that they developed that basically the more someone is on the autism spectrum, the worse they're able to perform on this task. There also been shown to be some gender differences. In general, women tend to do a little better on this task, mostly because physiologically and evolutionarily we were more hardwired to be the nurturers and the providers in society. But there are men who are extremely well at this task, so I'm not trying to make any sexist remarks. And finally, if you give oxytocin to people to a non-clinical population, this is another intranasal experiment, people do a lot better on this task. So I thought it would be fun to show you guys some of the stimuli and have you guess what these people are feeling. So you're basically given 4 choices. By looking at this man's eyes, how many think he looks jealous? How about panicked? Arrogant? And hateful. Good job, guys. Hey. Let's try this one. How many think she's joking? How about flustered? Desired? And convinced. Wow, you guys are pretty good at that. A lot of oxytocin going on in the audience. I like it. How about this lady? Does she look puzzled? How about nervous? Insisting? Contemplative. She is nervous. How about this fellow? Is he alarmed? How about shy? Hostile? Anxious? Majority wins. And granted, I bet a lot of you thinking that's pretty subjective. And I thought this was kind of a hokey test as well, but they really put it through the ringer by having huge committees agree on what these people are feeling. Let's try one last one. How many think this woman looks grateful? Flirtatious? Hostile? Disappointed? Excellent. You guys are acing this. So essentially we were able to show that the GG people who showed less heart rate reactivity, less stress reactivity when they were reporting it, also showed a better ability to read what other people are feeling through their eyes alone. We also used the Davis Interpersonal Reactivity Index, the IRI, and I think on that green piece of paper you have a little medley, a little sampling of what this measure is all about. So let me just walk you through the different subscales. So basically we were able to find that people who perform better in this interpersonal reactivity, who were better at these interpersonal skills, were also, had the GG group as well, so it must be nice to be a GG. Hate to break it to you guys though, only 25% of our participants were in the GG group. That leaves the rest of us in this high stress reactive, low empathetic group. But that doesn't mean there's no hope. As I mentioned, there are plenty of ways to get oxytocin circulating through your system, and we all have to work on being less stress reactive and more empathetic. All right, so let's talk about the subscales of the IRI. First thing we have is fantasy. So the 2 items on your questionnaire that relate to this are I really get involved with the feeling and characters in a novel. How many people would say this is true for them? How about false? And another reverse scored one. So sometimes in psychology, we can't have them all positively scored. You have to psych people out by having things reverse scored. So on the flip side, people who are low on the fantasy scale would usually say that they're usually objective when they watch a movie or play, and they don't completely get caught up in it. So you want to be completely suspended, or to go, God, that guy needs some acting lessons. And so there are a lot of individual differences in how we react to fantasy. Are you busy looking at how the author's using big words and that sort of thing, looking at the costumes and the cinematography? Are you really up in the story and that sort of thing? Second subscale that's really important is empathic concern. And then these are the two items on your green sheet that correspond to these. I often have tender, concerned feelings for people less fortunate than me. And when I see someone being treated unfairly, I sometimes don't feel so much pity for them. How many people think they're empathic? Thought so. So obviously that's a problem in psychological literature. A lot of people are answering things the way they want you to view them, even though they might not necessarily be that way. That's why it's important to have a zillion different measures for these people. So when you see a panhandler on your street, are you usually likely to give him money or to tell him to get a job and that sort of thing? Third subscale of the IRI is perspective taking. Do you find it difficult to put yourself in other people's shoes to see things from the other guy's point of view? Or do you sometimes understand your friends or other different people better by thinking about how things would look in their perspective, putting yourself in their shoes? Are you the type of person to go, wow, I can understand where he's coming from because he came from this background, his parents are this way? Or are you more likely to point and say, why can't you be more like us? That sort of thing. And final subscale of the IRI is personal distress. So when you're in an emotionally stressful situation, are you tense? Do you tend to freak out? When you see someone hurt, do you remain calm? Are you the type to start screaming and freaking out and need the paramedics yourself when you have a situation like this? And this is a scale that a lot of psychologists use to tap into empathy. Frank uses it too, so I'll pass the microphone and the clicker on to him, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Sarina. As Sarina was mentioning, our research interests intersect at this empathy, at the empathy construct. But what was interesting, I should tell you, is that when Sarina and I first found out about this event, we laughed because we didn't quite realize that we could occupy the same stage and talk about interests, that it was that related. The reason is that asking Sarina and us to talk about our research is like asking a gardener and someone who watches football to get on the same stage and talk, because they both involve food. Okay, so that was the key. So the empathy, and in fact the Davis IRI, was the connection. And went, wow, okay, yeah, we can do that. Okay, I'm interested in empathy, but not in a physiological sense. I'm a social psychologist. I'm a layperson's, a normal psychology, day-to-day, mundane, what makes people click kind of thing. And for me, empathy is important because of my interest in face-to-face interactions, but more importantly, the intelligence, the emotional intelligence that people vary in when they are involved with face-to-face interactions. I mean, some people are natural people. They are natural clinicians. I mean, they can size you up in an instant. They know how to work with you. These are the diplomats. These are the PR people. Wonderful. Others are not so blessed or fortunate with these aptitudes. So my research interest is or centers among the general skill or aptitude that we would just call social skills or emotional intelligence. Now, one thing about empathy. Why is empathy important? Because it would seem, right, if you think about these subscales that Dr. Rodrigues was telling me about, if you are good at perspective taking, you can understand people from their perspective. If you show concern from them, if you are affected, influenced by what's happening to them, you ought to have a better read onto them. In other words, you're tuned into people. So the Davis IRI is a scale that seems to indicate whether or not you are tuned in. and can read and understand people. But there's an interesting problem with the Davis IRI, and that is it asks you if you are a people person. Okay? Now this is a completely different psychological instrument than the method of reading someone's eyes, right, to see if you could tell their emotions. That's more like a test that I'm familiar with in college and high school. I mean, you can get that wrong, and you know you're wrong, but how do you get the Davis IRI wrong, right? And in fact, you could be whatever you want. You want to be empathic, you can figure it out and get the scale. So the trick, or the skill, I should say, or the science in assessing emotional intelligence and face-to-face interactions and even empathy is to measure the thing without it being contaminated by people's wants and desires. So there's a lot of ways to do this, but today I brought a task that I thought you could have fun. I understood before coming in here that you guys love to take tests and answer questions. So following up with Dr. Rodrigues, I brought a couple. So essentially, what I'm about to show you is a couple of items, right, from a test that is supposed to assess your ability to read interpersonal behavior. So can I cue this up? All right, so here's the question. You're going to see a couple of people. Which person is the other person's boss? Now don't worry about the video quality. It'll be.
But I'm not afraid of heights. I just don't like water.
I got one out of there.
Did you fall?
No, when I was about 3, I think it was about, my father, we went to the Grand Canyon, we were traveling across the country, and he had the railings around, and he said, here you go, put me on top of it, and he said, hang on, and then, and he was like, he had a firm grip on me, but I just went, ah, and started to fall forward, and he got me, pulled me back. I still remember, the part had that cool sense of humor that would have little folks' kids.
My dad used to play shark. Like underwater, sneak up and grab our feet. I could probably have screwed it too. My dad has a rather perverse sense of humor.
Well, it sounds like our fathers should get together and have a nice long talk.
They'd have a few necks, wouldn't they? Yeah. Yeah, let me tell you what I did to my kid.
Okay, one of these people is the boss. Raise your hand if you think it's the woman. Wait, oh, okay. Yeah. All right. Now, here's what's interesting about this clip. People get this answer correctly in about 5 to 10 seconds. Yes, somebody shout out why. How did you know? Body language, right, where they're sitting. All right, there are cues that are chronically embedded in the nonverbal behavioral stream. Okay, every time, as you are walking through your day, you are revealing things about yourself. You are revealing your attitudes, your emotions, your pains. This is chronically embedded, and it doesn't take very long to read them. Now, this has inspired people to wonder, well, how much of you is revealed in a 10-second clip? And it turns out that we've spent years studying all the research and experiments that do this, and it turns out an amazing amount. And the biggest illustration of this, or the most profound, the one that got a lot of press, was job interviews, okay? If you haven't been on a job interview yet, you youngins, you're going on one, and I'm sure that you can you'll be reading books on how to do it and all this, how to answer the questions. How do you answer the question, what's your weakness, right? And you get coached on these questions. Well, a few years back, we were interested in the interview process. We videotaped 30-minute interviews from 50 individuals, and they were assessed intensively by these trained interviewers. But then we videotaped them, and rather than analyze the videotapes, we started at the very beginning at literally the handshake, the meeting and greeting, right? So we just took the first 10 seconds, even before the formal interview started, okay? Then we showed them to a bunch of intro psych students, just the first 10 seconds. It's basically, hi, I'm Frank Brunieri, and welcome, Frank Brunieri, to the interview. Sit down, boom, right? That's all people saw. And they were untrained. They were just college undergraduates. And we just asked them some basic questions, like, how intelligent is this person? How competent do you think they are? How trustworthy? How punctual? How warm? How polite? Just standard things. Well, after so that was one group of data, one group of judgments. Second group of data, or the more important data, were the 3 to 5 page reports that these highly paid interviewers made after each interview, okay? So they're asking all these juicy questions, trying to identify what the person was really like, and then they filled out all these reports, 3 to 5 pages long, and then at the end, we snuck in these same questions. Well, on a scale of 1 to 10, how honorable is this person? How confident do you think they are? How polite they are? So they matched exactly, the questions were the same questions that we asked the undergraduates. Result, the undergraduates predicted how the interviewers rated the candidates. Okay, so untrained intro psych students rating just 10 seconds, basically the handshake, predicted significantly who the interviewers rated positively and were going to hire on the basis of a 30-minute structured interview. Okay, that is an illustration of the amount of information that is accessible to you. And that's what got me started in first impression research. And the idea, of course, is that, well, if you're an emotionally intelligent individual, an empathic individual, you should have a better read on this. Let's take a look at another clip. Actually, that previous one was status. This is going to be something else. So let's roll this one and see what's on there. Oh, this is good. In which scene is she lying? She's telling the truth and lying in one.
Mom and my dad are still together, even though he lived in San Jose at his mother-in-law's house for 9 years and commuted back and forth every weekend from San Jose to Ukiah and back. He would sit at different electronics technicians' places in the Bay Area. My mom's name is Jan, my dad's name is Don. They still get along. My dad's an atheist. My mom is a Seventh-day Adventist, which is pretty strange because I ended up going to church on Saturday all through school, which didn't quite mesh well with everybody else. Kind of been an oddball the whole time. Skipping a grade, being younger than everyone else, and going to a weird church. Not fun. But I guess I'm a stronger person for it.
There'll be another one coming later. Will there?
The next one?
Yeah, next one. That's next one. Oh, we didn't. Oh, okay. Well, let's get back. I can. You don't have to. This is even a tougher question for you. Okay. Was she telling the truth or was she lying? No, she was telling the truth. Now let me just explain the complexities. I mean, what does it take, right? Well, what does it take to determine whether someone's lying? Well, first you have to know what does it take to lie, right? Now the brain is amazingly complex. You actually have a couple of different brains going on here. I mean, Dr. Rodrigues was mentioning the right brain, left brain. You also have a top brain that you're in control of, and then an automatic brain underneath it, a more primitive brain. So you actually got a lot of brains, working the system here. And when you are lying, especially to someone, especially if it's an emotional lie, think about what's happening. You have a true emotion, okay? So maybe you stubbed your toe, ow, and you're angry at the couch, but then your darling son or daughter comes up, right? And so you want, you're happy to meet them, right? You in a sense got to lie. Right now you're feeling irritation, pain, and the amygdala is going wildly, but you want to communicate, right? Warmth and stuff. So you have to change your physiological response in your musculature. You have to inhibit, you have to clamp down on the true emotion, and then you have to act, right? You have to act out. So it's a very complicated thing. Now this is where the lie detector has to have several skills. One is you have to be able to read that spontaneous emotion in the amygdala that is buried underneath there, right? So you have to detect those emotions even when someone is pulling a poker face on you, right? You can still, and in fact, it may leak out, and that's how empathic people do it. They catch the leakage cues, and the tone of voice is classic, as are some of the body language. But what you say, you can control what you say, you can control your facial expressions. That's actually tougher to read. But also, an individual who is a good lie detector, this is interesting, they have to be a good actor. You have to know what the right thing is. So you have to be able to catch a person in that stereotypical display. So being able to detect when someone's lying, it involves an enormous amount of cues, which may have an empathy component or may not. Now, here's what my research has led me to believe or to conclude. We have not found any relationship between the Davis IRI, right, the self-reports of all these things, and a person's ability to actually read people, which is, well, maybe that's not so surprising, but a lot of people have reputations, I guess we're hanging on this. So right now at OSU, we are in the process of trying to come up with a better mousetrap, trying to come up with a better measure of empathy that would, in a sense, catch a skilled response in the act. And this leads to a study I just wanted to tell you about, and then give you some interesting take-home nuggets. Okay, this is a research program that several of my students in Oregon State have been laboring on for years. In fact, I want to give a shout out to Jill Brown. Jill Brown, raise your hand. She is my lab supervisor, and couldn't be doing this without her. She's just fantastic. So anyway, here's the situation. Now, this is a very interesting paradigm. All of these people come in, and they're told, don't communicate. They're strange. They don't know each other. Don't communicate to anybody. We put little letters around them so they don't even refer to the name. Don't say hi. Don't eyebrow flash. Don't do nothing. Just sit there, okay? And what they have to do is answer these questions about everybody else at the table, one at a time. And these questions are, how extroverted are you? How critical? Not are you, but how everybody else is. Now, what this is essentially is a personality judgment test. Okay, so they call it zero acquaintance. And here's the question: how accurate are people at judging another person's personality before they interact with them? Right? Isn't that an interesting idea? Now, the null hypothesis was that can't. Right? You can't judge me by what I look like. In fact, people say, don't judge me. You have to get to know me. Well, let me tell you, dozens of psychological studies have shown, no, you can't judge a book by its cover. Certain aspects of it. The keys or the things that are observable, even before you interact, are extroversion, whether or not you like people and can talk to people, and conscientiousness. So you can accurately assess, or so the literature goes, an individual's conscientiousness. Okay, now this led us here at OSU to go back to the job interview situation, right? Because this was the interesting question that we had left hanging. How was it possible for an untrained undergraduate, right, to judge a candidate for a job interview similarly than the interviewers did after interviewing them? I mean, how is that possible? What were they reading? Who was right, who was wrong? Well, this result with the conscientiousness and extroversion gives us a clue. We went through and did a similar study, but this time, instead of sitting around on the table, we mocked up an interview situation where people came in and they were asked to introduce themselves and shake hands and sit down. Okay, so instead of zero acquaintance, you got at least that handshake and sit down. Not everybody was afforded the handshake opportunity. The question, the research question was, when you shake somebody's hand, are you revealing something about your personality? Is the handshake important? The answer, well, we did not find systematic relationships between what was communicated. In other words, people who shake their hands aren't more extroverted or happy or not. But what we did find, and this blew the doors off us when we first saw this, when males shake hands, they are much more accurate in judging each other's conscientiousness than when they don't shake hands. This finding did not replicate with females. We think might have to do something to do with the fact that our females were intro psych students, and a lot of them never even shook hands before. Okay, so this might be a practice effect. But this is the essence. Shaking hands transmits, communicates conscientiousness. Therefore, on a job interview, you can win or lose the job at the handshake. And it's valid because it's telling the person something about your conscientiousness. So, what have you learned tonight? You better learn that handshakes are important. They reveal something about yourself. And if you haven't practiced your handshake, I recommend it's never too early to start. You should practice your handshakes tonight. Now, let me tell you a little bit about the proper American handshake. Okay? The American handshake. Now, you can read about these, and I've searched the web, and a lot of them are fine, are fine. But there's a couple of elements that are easily recognized. Okay, the general principle that you have to just strive for, and don't worry about if your hands are cold or clammy. Don't worry about it because you can't do anything about it. All right, so that's not important. What are important are two things. One is you have a good handshake is one that is matched, reciprocated. Okay, when you shake hands, the ideal handshake is one that you don't really feel. Okay, because it's so evenly matched. Now, but that's difficult to achieve, right? Because some people grab your fingertips, or some people crunch the knuckles. So, in order to achieve that, what you have to be thinking of is web to web, web to web. That is your goal. When you are about to shake hands with somebody, you have to aggressively map or place your web in their web, and then match the strength. Okay? Now, in order to do this, though, and people who shake hands well, they know this already. I'm going to demonstrate. You have to step into it. Okay? You can't wait for the handshake. So, forgive me, but when you're handshaking, you have to step forward and thrust your hand, not into their space, but thrust the hand so that your webs connect before they have a chance to grab down. Then you pump twice, 1, 2, and release. That's a handshake. You don't linger. You're just in, out, done. Also, people have commented that your eye contact, very important. Okay, so while you're doing this, you want to look at it. There's nothing more disconcerting than when someone's going through your hand but not looking at you. It's like somebody who's not looking at the road when they're driving. So when you shake someone's hand, look them in the eye. Okay, now, so that's sort of one little nugget in the research program, which I think is cool. One, first impressions can matter. Two, they can be valid, even in a couple seconds. And how? Who knew? It turned out that a handshake can tell you about conscientiousness, which is probably what's going to get you the job or not. So that's how empathy relates to my research. Thank you very much.
I was going to shake his hand, but it's just too much pressure at this point. So. All right, this is the question and answer part of the session. Frank, weren't they great? Who's got a question? Right here?
I have a question for Dr. Rodriguez. You said GG phenotypes were correlated with autism. But you also said that was the more empathetic.
Oh, perhaps I misspoke. It's actually the reverse. So the people who are the GG genotype have a tendency to not be autistic.
Oh.
Yes,
okay.
in a intuitive sense.
Okay. I'm sorry. I
Oh,
must
no
have
worries.
misheard.
Just here. So, can a sociopath then master a handshake and mimic sincerity and throw all that off? Or is it
Okay, so the question is, can a sociopath, in a sense, act, fake it, if you will? And now I'm speculating. Okay, I'm not resorting to research, but the sociopath can fake all of the stereotypical conduct psychological research, everything is in the definition. Okay, everything. Okay, so the conscientiousness that we were looking at or measuring involved a combination of specific attributes, including punctuality, dependability, organization, and reliability, that kind of stuff.
So all that's encompassed in
All that in
transmitted just by a handshake.
and she asks, is all that is encompassing in the handshake? I don't know if all of it is, but enough of it so that we had that overall effect. What I mean by that is it's conceivable that something within those lists of attributes isn't being communicated, you know, but maybe it's punctuality, maybe it's not, I don't know. But generally that was the constellation of attributes with conscientiousness.
Just over here.
I remember reading a story, it happened about 1850 or 1860 in the Midwest, and I think it was happened with the Lakota, where they were just getting introduced to the Western ways, and the handshake was totally foreign to them. And a couple of teenage Lakota Indians saw what was happening, and they walked up to each other and grabbed their hands and shook it, and then absolutely rolled on the ground, laughing their head off. They were totally oblivious to the significance of it in the Western world. So I maintain that the handshake is dependent upon culture, it's dependent upon your emotional state at the time that you're doing it.
Okay, so there was a comment about the arbitrary nature of the handshake. It's not a natural human behavior. It's culturally derived. In fact, we, you know, at some point humans made it up, right? It's not, we're not instinctive. There's nothing instinctual about a handshake. And so it is culturally derived, and that is precisely why it reveals conscientiousness, okay? A handshake, you should think now, a handshake is nothing more than a practiced, ritualized sequence of movements. So the conscientious individual masters, they have to learn it, they have to practice, they have to want to do it well, because it's not instinctual. And I believe personally, that's how come the handshake continues that. It's a learned behavior. So that's why it's worth learning.
The back.
Have researchers found any connection among genes, oxytocin, empathy, and political affiliation?
Good question. So for those of you who didn't hear, he's asking, is there any association between oxytocin and genes and political affiliation? Just to tease you guys, there's no published research out there, but I do have some findings showing that people in the GG group tend to be democratic, tend to be liberal. Don't tell anyone that yet, I just have to publish it.
This right here.
Oh yeah, so that's a really good question. So basically those letters are basically signaling the nucleotide to code for the different amino acids, which then code for the different proteins. So the GG group, they have 2 bonding synapses, and then the A people have adenine, and so the AG group are basically in the middle. And so these people who are basically in the middle, they tend to decide more with the AA group than the GG group, but they were bouncing back and forth. Now on a functional level, what do these genotypes mean? We don't know. We're hypothesizing that it's somehow related to how much oxytocin is available in your system, how sensitive you are to it, and so forth. So the functionality, what is different biologically, we're not exactly sure, but it really seems to have to do with how much oxytocin is in your system and how well you're using it.
So you're saying that oxytocin is influences the amount of bonding you have versus basic?
We're still working on that, so we're not exactly sure functionally what's happening. But the other literature suggests that the GG group has more oxytocin in their system, or somehow it's more accessible to them so that they can read other people's emotions and calm their stress response a little better than other people.
Could you please repeat the question from Kathy were asking?
Okay, yeah, sorry about that. So she was basically, her follow-up question was actually asking, like, the GG group versus AA group, what's happening in their bodies? How is the oxytocin system going on a little differently? And we're not sure. So we're just hypothesizing it has something to do with oxytocin sensitivity.
Yes.
Where do mirror neurons fit in with this?
Oh, excellent question. So she's asking where mirror neurons come into So when we see people playing sports, we can imitate them and react with them. When we're kind of imitating other people, we think that a lot of children do this to basically mirror our actions and so forth. What mirror neurons have to do with this, we don't know. There are studies going on right now looking at how mirror neurons might be affected by the oxytocin system. Are people with more oxytocin better at mirroring or imitating people? We don't know, but that's an excellent question.
I'd like to just follow up on that. In social psych research, they have studied the impact of mirroring people. Apparently, unconsciously, when we are interacting with people, we sometimes adopt their postures and mirror their movements, even though we're unaware of it. And it turns out that there's a relationship between the extent to which we unconsciously mirror a person we're talking to and the rapport, the closeness we feel with them. So there's a lot of interesting possible implications about what those mirror neurons are doing.
I've been involved recently with interviewing people for a job, but these are phone interviews, so I don't have all the cues. So, lacking all those cues for a first impression in my interview, is that actually a phone interview actually a more accurate assessment of the person's ability?
Maybe. I've actually been asked many times to I'm sorry. When the interview is a phone interview, there's obviously a lack of all those cues, and you don't shake anybody over the phone. So then what do you do? And is possibly a phone interview more accurate or more valid than a face-to-face interview? This is one of these it depends wildly on a lot of different things. But there are certain principles. One, and this is the most obvious, and this is what I tell people when they ask me if they want to improve their interviewing skills. If the job description involves something that doesn't involve charisma, attraction, and interpersonal skills, then the interview has no business. You could the best predictor of behavior is past behavior. So the resume, you should hire it. So the interview should only be used when these things matter. If you need somebody to be likable, attractive, a people person. So I mean that's a simple thing. Otherwise, what happens is human beings think they can improve on the data. They can improve on the numerical assessment and like, okay, this is what the resume says, but if I see their eyes, I'll know better. And that the psychology proves that doesn't happen. So it's statistical prediction is always better. But I'm afraid it depends.
I have read that our primitive emotions are hardwired, and that feelings, and that when activated, the feelings we experience come along tens of seconds later. I don't know if any of that's true, but you showed an image that seemed to indicate that stress modified neurons. So is the hardwiring, if it exists, is that modified by stress?
Oh yeah, so he's asking, we have these hardwired emotions that we believe are evolutionarily in place to get us out of certain situations. Can they be modified by different emotions and stress? And the answer is yes. So there's a lot of cultural aspects to how we appraise emotions. It also depends on how we were raised and the experiences, whether they be positive and negative that we go through life. So indeed, we do have these instinctual, rapid, robust, raw, primal emotions that come on online right away. But we also have these more complex and nuanced ways of appraising a situation based on how emotionally reactive we are, how threatening it is, and so forth. So the answer is yes and no.
There's a lot of inhumanity to humans, in history and in war. And are we wired so that somehow we can just overcome our genetic disposition to say, I'm just not going to worry about what I'm doing to this other person, and I'm going to be brutal and move on and continue to be brutal? Explain more about what are the realities of our disposition?
Yeah, so his question was kind of going on that a lot of atrocities are committed by other human beings towards other human beings and also towards other creatures. Is there some sort of override? Are we somehow rewiring our brains and so forth? The answer is not really. We always know when we're hurting someone else, but we can learn to suppress these drives with our prefrontal cortex. So our cortex can kind of reanalyze or reconceptualize what you're doing because you're doing it for the greater good. However, even though you might have this ability to override it temporarily, it often leads to suppression. So a lot of people who do commit atrocities throughout life, while some of them never come to believe it, a lot of them do suffer from all these biological, physiological, and mental disorders manifesting itself during that suppression of what's good and what's bad.
Could you speak to the differences in gender? Now, I'm interested in gender differences specific between men and women. Specifically, it's the the empty bucket that a lot of us have in our head. Men go to when our wife says, "Honey, what are you thinking?" and we say nothing. What are you feeling? And we say nothing. Have you done any kind of research at all that changes the difference?
Yeah, so he's asking about gender differences between men and women, and I definitely have to tiptoe around this to not make any sexist remarks. But evolutionarily, we are hardwired to have different functions. Women are more hardwired to be nurturers and to form attachment. Men are more hardwired to be emotionally unavailable so they can go out and battle these wars and that sort of thing. But these are gross overgeneralizations, so you can't go by that. But we are genetically hardwired to be a little different. Women tend to be more attuned to what's around them and attachment, men a little bit more independent. But as we progress as a society and our roles are changing, our physiology and our brains are changing along with it. Still catching up, but there's a lot of hope for us yet.
I can be sexist. And this is from the research that some of the research that I've completed with some colleagues of mine in Canada have looked at the couple relationship and just how to communicate. Now the objective was a little bit different, but I have watched dozens and dozens and dozens of romantically involved couples discussing problems in their lives. And I am embarrassed and ashamed to be a man when I watch these because it is clear the differential skills and engagement that men and women have in these things. It's stereotypical, but it's true. Men are more likely to withdraw and be monosyllabic in their responses. And women are trying. It actually pains me. But the flip side is that when it comes to being very, very good at reading an emotion or facial expression or some of the clips that I showed you about, the male-female difference that we have known about for a long time isn't really as strong as you might think. So there is a debate now in terms of these accurately reading people and empathy stuff, whether, how much is due to perhaps genetic predispositions and skills, and how much is motivational. So, but women are still, they still score more highly in these tests, but the difference isn't as large as you might think. But in my mind, they make better partners. Sorry. Yes. Oh, the question was involved cross-cultural differences or cross-cultural effects and accuracy. This one I can just tell you there is not enough research yet to make any claims. However, although the reason is this: there are cross-cultural differences in behavioral norms, right? People greet each other different ways. Within different cultures, there is an appropriate distance that you have to stand when you're talking to somebody, right? So you go to some cultures and they're close to you, other cultures far away. So it's very difficult to read other cultures and be accurate across cultures. But interestingly, although cultures differ in interpersonal space is used exactly the same way, right? So even if you go to Greece, they might stand in a different space, but the closer you get, that's a good thing. The farther you away, that's a bad thing. So the way in which these behaviors are moved, those are universals, but the specific behaviors are not, which means that accuracy may not translate well interculturally, but the research isn't there yet.
Yes. How about racially and religiously? Can you overcome the prejudices that are inbred in especially populational areas like the South?
No.
That are maybe no. There's no way. There's no way to.
Yeah, I'm sorry. The question is, can you overcome prejudices and prejudices, be they racial, ethnic, gender, anything, sexual orientation? The reason say no, this is less to do with this particular talk, but just in general, the automaticity of people's behaviors. All right, you have a chance to control what you're thinking, but you really do not have a chance to control the automatic behavioral movements that are being governed by the lower portions of your brain that aren't subject to your will. So in other words, when you feel threatened, intimidated, or repulsed by an individual, you might fight it and try to appear, but there are messages, signals that you're sending to your body so that you can't really overcome it. Case in point, one of the measures of prejudice in the 1960s and 70s that turned out to be more valid than any of the state-of-the-art prejudice scales was basically how close did a person sit next to another person of color. Okay, and it was completely unrelated to their score on the prejudice test. It was completely unrelated to what they thought. So that's why nonverbal behavior and a person's behavior is so important, because it may provide an accurate read. And anything that we do mentally, I don't know how successful it is. I'm big on thinking that people are guilty of self-delusions.
I'd like to touch on that at a neurobiological level. We're actually naturally hardwired to be afraid of people who are different than us. So even on an unconscious level, if you're not perceiving that you're having, let's say, faces from a different ethnicity flash to you, your amygdala is freaking out because you're seeing someone that's different from you. Now, research has shown that you can't override this, but if you're asking people, if you're showing them a celebrity, that activation doesn't take place. Or if you're like, what did this guy have for breakfast? Or what do you think his wife thinks about that? Then the activation goes down as well. So the more you're exposed to people that are different from you, or the more you try to get to know them or to expose yourself to different types of people, you can actually dampen those prejudices. But Frank is absolutely right. It's absolutely hardwired. We're just naturally afraid. And of course that was very useful back in our caveman days when we're worried about the neighboring tribe invading our tribe, and so we're kind of hardwired to judge people that look different than us. In modern day society, that's not so adaptive. So we're getting a little better the more we're exposed to different cultures.
And let me just say something positive, because I hate to be like, some people do learn to love liver, right? So that obviously the answer is yes.
Yeah, someone asked about the correlation between empathy and politics. And I'm curious if you see any correlation between empathy and learning style. And people who work with students, for example, who are learning difference will say they have a very high degree of empathy, despite their inability to learn the way that most people do. And I just wonder if that's cultural or is that?
Oh, that's a really good question. So he's asking, is there any relationship between empathy and learning abilities? Did I get that right?
Yes.
So I don't have any research that taps into that directly, but we are showing that people who show more empathy tend to be a little bit more open, a little bit able to look at things in different points of view and different perspectives, so that openness might lead them to a different type of learning style.
Let me jump in. It just so happened one of the very first studies that I published happened to be on that topic, and there was a positive relationship between the empathy of a student and the amount of verbal material that they learned from a teacher. This was in a high school, which is kind of odd because empathy is sort of a nonverbal thing. But yes, from the study, empathy might have relationships to the ability to learn. And interestingly, there was some evidence, but not as strong, on the teacher side too. And having empathy as a teacher to sometimes facilitate the learning, but not as clear.
We have time for one more. Yes.
What role do pheromones play?
What role do pheromones
What
play?
role do pheromones play? So pheromones are a very controversial and mysterious topic in the human species. So unfortunately, there's not nearly enough data to support or answer your question. Some people absolutely believe that pheromones take place. You've probably seen the perfumes on the market. But a lot of people don't think that we really rely on them like other animals do, because we're not as our olfactory systems are not as hardwired. So we don't have to rely on smell and sensation as much. So the answer is I don't know. No one knows yet.
It doesn't necessarily affect first impressions.
Oh, that? Do you know, Frank?
No, I actually don't. I don't.
Good question, though.
All right, well, please, a round of applause once more for Dr. Rodrigues. We want to thank all of you once again for joining us here for Science Club. Please remember the next month, February 8th, we're going to have Kim Montaigne here from Samaritan Health Services to share with you the latest in heart health, fact and fiction, and the latest in cardiac technology. So your homework assignment, go home and work on your handshakes, and we'll see you next month.
So what was the peak making? We had about 15 or so people that watched the entire thing, and we had 80 total view it. Yeah. No, I think that's wonderful. Yeah.